Welcome, everybody. This is the Amner Martinez podcast, and I'm here with my.
It used to be.
What is now?
I don't know, something weird.
This is something else. What is this? By the way,
Something very strange.
we have our coffee cups.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, we're just having fun doing things, and we also have like new techs, interns, Luca and Azul. They're out of the picture, but they're working. They're helping us work the camera. But our next guest is Joe Henry. We talked to him about a week ago. He is the political director of LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens.
Why do you say it like that?
Why? It sounds kind of like a superhero.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. It does to me.
Well, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah,
Well,
it's kinda
when
cool.
you say it like
the
that.
League of United
But like
Latin
if you say it
American
normal,
Citizens.
if you say it normal, it's gonna be
So
different.
he talked about the history of LULAC. They're almost 100 years old organization of Latinos that fight for justice. He'll break it down. They have chapters all over the nation. And yeah, he came in and talked to us about current events, current issues that are happening.
I know, I was there.
You were there. Yes,
Yeah.
you'll be able to see Kenji on one of the
Like a little cameo.
cameo. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're amateurs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's good.
Yeah. You'll see the amateur cameo. the dumbest cameo ever.
So yeah, we talked about activism. We talked about where his activism came from and what it is to be an activist, and then we talked about issues, like border suppression legislation that got passed here in Iowa. Which, by the way, there's no proof of any voter fraud here in Iowa. There's nothing. Yet somehow Republicans presented legislation that is going to cut off time for voting 1 day less or 1 hour less or something like that. But what do you think about that?
It stinks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what that shit's about, but
Yeah.
it just does, like make it harder for people to vote,
Yeah.
especially people that work many jobs, can't make it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it just sounds like it's
Just-
shady. It's
yeah,
shady.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
shady.
Shady.
I mean, I don't know. I don't really pay attention. I can't
Yeah.
vote anyway, so
but just on the surface,
But
it just looks funny, right?
it
Like,
looks
why?
very shady. I don't know. Like I think that if I were a voter, I would be like, that kind of
Yeah.
doesn't look good.
Right. But
You
they
know?
don't care.
Yeah, they don't give a shit.
They don't care.
They don't give a shit.
Yeah. So we talked about that too. We talked about the parties, Democrats. People assume that Latinos or any other minority groups, people of color vote a certain way, and it's not true, or religious wise. So we talked a little bit about that. We talked about the impact of immigration and immigrants locally. He's a very smart guy. He brings a lot of statistics, numbers, projections that make him a very intriguing person to talk to, because he's always giving you educational information.
He's like, facts.
Yeah.
Let me serve you some facts.
Yeah. So I want to thank Joe Henry for his leadership. I've been following him for a couple of years, and now that I've sat down with him and spoke with him, I'm gonna continue to listen to him and pay attention, because he means well. Again, activism. He's a successful realtor. He doesn't have to be doing this stuff. Some activists are just doing it.
I
because
wouldn't.
Right.
I wouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, I know. And I don't either, but just there's some activists out there that are just such, it's like a calling for them, and it's, you got to respect that,
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting conversation. So thank you, Joe Henry. Thank you to Good Vibes Movement for letting us use their space. They're a really great organization as well. They serve the community in a lot of different ways. So please visit Good Vibes Movement. And yeah, visit amplifieddsm.com. We have 3 new podcasters that joined us.
And we have more.
Yeah, and more are coming. So let's just keep growing the network. Tell everybody about it. Share it. Comment on it. Let us know what you think, and hopefully we just keep going. And we have some exciting interviews coming up too. Well, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Joe Henry, you're the political director of
LULAC, Iowa.
LULAC, Iowa, the League of
United Latin American Citizens. And
the League
also,
of United Latin American Citizens.
Right. We're the oldest and largest Latino civil rights organization in the country. We're almost as old as the NAACP.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was started, it's
1929.
1920s.
1929, it was 3 Latino organizations that came together specifically on the one priority is to help 70,000 displaced Mexicans who had their land taken away from them when the borders changed back in 1846.
Okay.
So that's where the saying comes from, where we didn't cross the border crossed us.
Yes, yes. I was talking to a Californian, and her family has been in California for generations and generations and generations. She's like, actually, my family's been here before the border, changed. So that's the saying, right? Like, we didn't cross the
Exactly.
border. The border.
The border crossed us.
crossed us.
There was after the Mexican Civil War. There was a Treaty of Guadalupe, and in that, for people, Mexicans who wanted to stay where they were at, New Mexico, California, Arizona, and in a number of other states. The agreement is that they would be able to have also U.S. citizenship and keep their land. The Congress did not fulfill their promise. In many of the displaced people from our community lost their rights to their land. Although they were given the right to citizenship, they lost their land. So it took 3 Latino organizations coming together to fight for their rights, and they were somewhat successful. But that was, that took over 50, 60, 70 years of struggle to say this is our land. So, you see this with the indigenous
Right.
community too. And of course, we are part of the indigenous community, we as Latinos. So there's a lot of history there.
Yeah.
That's
So
important.
this country has been not fulfilling its duties, its treaties, its
Treaties.
contracts, right? Like literal contracts that it has signed.
Has broken over and over again. So, we see this with us. Those of us from the Latino community, we've seen this with the indigenous people over and over again. And it's something that, for lack of a better way of saying it, it is, we've had to deal with their form of capitalism, ongoing exploitation of communities of color. Of course, the black community has suffered tremendously from the exploitation of our country.
And I think a lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, I mean white people.
Right.
They want everybody to just kind of conform, right? So I look at these organizations like LULAC and Black Lives Matter and
Exactly.
as disruptors, right? There has to be a disruptive movement. If not, then things don't change.
They never change unless we get out onto the streets. Dolores Huerta once said that, get off the sidewalk, get on the streets. And we have to do that. Any achievement that has been made by people of color, by blacks, people of color, women, has required us to rebel, to protest. That's the only way. When you look at every single movement,
Right.
We have had to protest, and then eventually the good white people allow say that they will adopt the laws. When blacks and people of color were protesting during the civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s, people were getting out into the streets. They were protesting. Finally, President Johnson decided to sign the Civil Rights Bill, but it took protest. And of course, we've seen that. Edna Griffin, who is a civil rights hero here in Des Moines, who in 1948 demanded to be seated in the white-only section of Katz Drugstore downtown.
Okay.
She demanded her right to sit with white people. And it took her protest, it took a lawsuit, and even after she won her battle in 1948 here in Des Moines, she still had to boycott Katz Drugstore downtown because they still were not allowing black people to be served downtown at 7th and Locust. So protest has always been part and parcel of the struggle that we have faced of black and brown skinned people, indigenous people, and we have to remember that. We have to remind our communities that at some point we do have to get back on the street. We do have to do the boycotts. That's how things done. By 2032, people of color will be the majority population in the United States. Not too far away. We're only 11 years away. There was a point where it was thought it was going to take till 2040, but no, it's going to be
2030. So it keeps
2030.
changing. The number keeps getting closer a little bit.
Exactly. Well, in Iowa, you look at 500,000 K through 12 kids, 20% are kids of color. In Des Moines schools, 1,500 kids every month turn age 18. 57% of the 34,000 school-age kids in Des Moines are from communities of color. We're changing significantly. We have a saying in our community that if you're not already related to a Latino, you soon will be.
Yes, whether you want to or
happen.
not.
and it's going to be with other communities of color too. So, it's a true two-prong attack.
Yes,
it's both boycotts, protest. It's also young people falling in love. Diversity is beautiful.
Yeah.
To even young white
The
people.
face of America is changing.
It is.
And it's an inevitable shift. I saw it personally. So I landed here in Iowa in 1995, and in Perry, Iowa, we went straight to Perry, meatpacking plant town, and there was 9 Latino students, and 2 of them were my sisters. And now Perry is like 50-50 Latino school.
Exactly.
The high school.
Yeah.
Which is, that's a 25-year gap, but still, like, it's just been
exponential growth.
Yes.
And we see that in many communities in Iowa. There's actually 15 counties out of the 99 counties in Iowa that have a high proportion of Latinos and of registered Latino voters. So we see it in Polk County, and then over to Dallas County, where Perry's at. Sioux City is very interesting. That's Woodbury County. That's the second largest population of Latinos in Sioux City, Woodbury County. That's the second highest amount of Latino registered voters. And then we look at Marshall County, Marshalltown. We look at Muscatine. That's another rising star. Scott County, where Davenport is, Quad Cities, has a history of Latino struggle. So it goes on and on. But we are growing by leaps and bounds. Immigration has fueled the recovery of the economy, not only in Iowa, but throughout the Midwest. What's interesting about the United States was built by slave labor and also by immigration. And what's unique is we have an opportunity in this country to acknowledge the importance of immigrants. Because at the end of the day, we're all immigrants.
Right.
Except for the indigenous population. But again, we're also intertwined with that.
Right.
And we need to acknowledge that. We need to understand it. We need to promote it. We need to make sure that the white community understands that. We need comprehensive immigration reform because immigration fuels this economy.
So this country was is protesting or revolting or wanting a better America. That's part of the nature of this country, right? Like, it's in its fabric.
Right. And
So-
it started with the white community first because the white Europeans wanted to come here because they were exploited, religious persecution. There were wealthier whites that had already controlled the marketplace where they were at. So they wanted to go to a free land, they stated, to come here. So they did create a democracy, but that democracy was only for white males at the very beginning. But fortunately, democracy has spread and again through struggle from the communities of color. So we now share in that democracy, which is a tremendous opportunity, and it's an example to the rest of the world that democracy can make things happen, can make things fair. It's it's a story that isn't finished yet, and we're
Right.
part of it.
Right, because it's the progress is almost like the speed of a turtle, right?
It is. It
Um,
is. But it starts with us, though.
Yeah, it starts with the disruptors. It starts with the Harriet
Yes.
Tubmans. It starts with the people that are like not willing to stand by and stay quiet.
It's our right. And that was actually Edna Griffin's statement. It's my right, and I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
And that's what she stated in 1948 when she demanded to be seated in the white-only section of Katz Drugstore downtown. She
And-
was my mentor. That's why I kind
Okay.
of bring that
Yeah,
up.
she has a park named after her,
A
correct?
park. She has a park. She has a walking pedestrian bridge, and she has a building named after her.
Wow.
And she's applauded for all her rebellious nature, her boycotts. But the sad thing about it is she fought the fights, and then the white community embraced it afterwards and almost took ownership of it. But it was not them who
Yeah.
fought for her right. It was her. It was her. It was the black community and also Latinos.
So in her time, she was looked at like, oh, come on, just go with the flow, be with the status
Exactly.
quo. She decided not to.
Yeah, exactly. She was told over and over again, just mind your place.
Right.
Just be a good black person. Don't disrupt,
Right.
as you stated. She refused to accept that. She was extremely brilliant in her politics. She was a progressive. She was a Democrat. She was also a communist, and she extremely brilliant person. And from what she had achieved, she was kind of a mentor. She was a mentor to me. She was also a mentor to Mary Campos too. 'Cause
Okay.
Mary Campos worked for her
Oh, okay.
over on Forest Avenue at Stan's. Edna's husband was a doctor, and he had his office on 2400 Forest Avenue.
And Mary Campos is a prolific Latina leader here in Iowa.
She is, but it's interesting though because she worked for Edna's husband. Mary was a good friend of my family, the Enriquez family. And Mary and I fought very hard during the 80s to make sure that that the Latinos had the right to get hired in city jobs. But her politics veered more towards the Democratic Party. My politics, due to Edna, veered more towards socialists and communists.
Oh, so she impacted.
Well, when Mary worked for Edna's husband, but Edna taught me when I was 26 of how to be an activist, how to rebel.
Oh.
So there was a difference. So I became the radical. Mary was accepted by the establishment.
I see.
So as we see sometimes, and I have a lot of respect for Mary and the struggles she went through, but sometimes the establishment, the white community, likes to put a few of us on the shelf and say, hey, we have some of these.
Which what people would call tokenization, right?
Tokenizing. And then those of us who rebel, they try to prevent us from raising our voice. And they did that with Edna. They've done that with me. They've done that with many others. And then we see the BLM movement last year with many black voices raising their demands and how the city was fighting their demands.
Right.
Even when the BLM movement, the activists, not only black but brown faces, demanded the mayor at his doorstep to make change happen. And, we're still having to make those demands within the black community and the Latino
They are the
community.
modern day Ednas.
They are. The young people, especially from the black community, are our leaders. When you are demanding justice in your late teens, early 20s, you are doing something that will change the way things are done in the future.
Right.
And we must embrace that. We must provide as much support as possible. The establishment does not want that to happen. The white community would rather us kind of fit into a certain paradigm that they have designed of being good people of color, and we can't allow that to happen.
And I want to kind of touch base a little bit on that. When you mentioned that the establishment will grab someone and maybe unbeknownst to that person, use them almost, right? Like use them and say, look, we have our
Exactly.
our Latino, or we have our African American here that
It,
thinks
well,
the way that we think.
it happens even without the awareness of the person that it's happening to. I mean, I have this, I have people from the establishment say, hey, Joe, we want you to be part of a committee. But, once I'm part of the committee, then I start speaking up. Then they go, well, Joe, you probably need to go somewhere else
Yeah.
on that. So it is hard for people who to not understand that. I know that it would, if I was to bring this up to Mary, she would not accept that that label. But this is the problem that we have. We have in Iowa is a perfect example of where we have the white establishment that is demanding that we mind ourselves, and that we only take certain steps, and that we work within their paradigm. And then they take some of us, they put us on committees. They take pictures with us. They don't really invite us over for dinner or anything like that.
Yeah.
We're not their real good friends.
Yeah.
And then that's their way of maintaining power. But it's economic power. At the end of the day, this is all about economics. It's about not sharing knowledge. Because what many of us have been fighting for over the decades is for economic freedom, economic justice, equality. We hear a lot of discussion about mutual aid being promoted through BLM. We are fighting for things that they in the white community do not want to give up. They do not want to give up the things that we have produced for them.
And this is this type of work, this activism, that takes a lot of energy. That's exhausting.
Extremely exhausting. When you look, again, and I'm bringing back Edna, when you look her and her husband, who was a doctor, could have made a lot of money, could have bought a big house south of Grand, but they end up living in a small little 2.5 bedroom home over on 44th Street, in which they weren't welcome, by the way, when they moved there, because they gave their money. They spent most of their money for the movements at that time through decades. So when you fight for justice, it's not glamorous. It's not something that you're going to receive rewards for, but you're doing something to protect your community, to provide economic justice for your community, equality.
Yeah. So changing back a little bit to like local issues that are current right now. I know that there's some voter suppression that, or some legislation that has been. Can you educate me a little bit on that?
Yeah. So a bill was just passed in the state legislature, both chambers, and I believe if it wasn't already signed, it will be signed by the governor. And it will reduce the amount of time you can vote early from 29 days down to 20 days. And before it was 40 days. But the mail-in ballot was instrumental last year because over 1 million people in Iowa voted by the mail ballot due to the COVID-19, the pandemic, 1 million out of 1.7 million. Reducing the amount of time to vote early is going to be difficult for many communities, especially ours, because there will be people, young and old, who may not have the time if they're working multiple jobs. On election day, they won't be able to make it to vote during the day election, or they might not have transportation. The other thing, too, with this voter suppression rule, it also reduces the amount of hours you can vote on election day, which is also a travesty. So instead of being able to vote till 9 o'clock at night, they're going to make it only till 8 o'clock. So they're taking another hour away, while at the same time taking the right to vote early away by limiting the amount of time. So it's a two-prong attack. There's another prong into it, too, that also on the voter, on the identification to provide. So all of that is going to make it difficult for our communities.
Right.
But nonetheless, we need to keep on fighting. We are looking at doing a lawsuit against the state of Iowa regarding this voter suppression law. So we'll be able to provide updates
from
later
the
on.
outside, right? So skeptic people would say it's an hour, it's one less day. Where does this need come from that to reduce time and reduce and make more hurdles for people to vote? Where does that come from?
Well, the Republicans have really looked at this in a very sophisticated way. They know that when they reduce things by law, and this voter suppression bill in Iowa is one of 133 voter suppression bills that have been promoted across the country in 30 states.
Say that number again.
133 voter suppression bills have been promoted in 30 states across the country. Multiple bills across the country in 30-some states. So it's a mathematical formula that if they do these reductions, then the significant impact will be towards communities of color who many work multiple jobs in our community. Many might not have transportation unless through public transportation. So it will limit their amount of voting. And if it can limit the amount of voting by only a few percentage points, it will allow victory for those who are
because some elections are being won by very small margins.
Yeah. Well, when you think about the white community, let's bring that up. The white community in general has a higher income. They don't, in general, work multiple jobs. Many have the ability to vote early without any problem. They get it. They understand it. And here we are as a Latino community. Many of our members, our adult members, are working more than one job. Many of our people are young. The median age of the Latino community in Iowa is 23. The median age of the white community is 38. So we have a lot of young people who are voting for the first time. We have a lot of young people who, coming out of high school, may still not have a car. They may need public transportation. A lot of these precinct locations where you vote, they're not near bus stops. And when you look at our community and other communities of color, sometimes it's difficult to understand the economic advantages of voting because we don't really actually receive direct benefit from voting. It's more of a long-term thing. Whereas those wealthy voters, those from the white communities, they see the tax breaks that happen after they get another member into the state legislature, after they get another member in Congress. They get direct benefit from that. So it takes time. But again, when we go back to the civil rights struggle, the March from Selma was all about voting. It was all about fighting for sanitary workers. It was about the right to vote, because that's where the power is. That was the power to free black people, to get them economic justice. And we have to do everything we can to provide that knowledge, that information.
So how do the Republicans camouflage or paint this legislature as? What is their spin on it? What is their positive spin on it?
Their spin on is they're reducing voter fraud, and they are increasing the security of the voting. They want to secure the vote. So it's
shouldn't that be after the vote though, right? Like they should just right, because that's where you verify votes, right? After people vote, not before they vote.
Right. To them, though, they use whatever they can. Another way of saying this is a form of gaslighting, which is they will say everything they can to point the blame on us. That the reason they have to do this is because they're afraid that some Latinos might not be legal. Therefore, they have to secure the vote. They have to make it harder. They have to restrict it. They have to require multiple forms of ID, verification, constantly using things like that, those arguments. So they reverse the argument.
Yeah.
They turn the table. And it's a very sophisticated way of arguing. It's when you are dealing with an oppressor will use words to put the blame on those who are oppressed. Again, the black community is a perfect example of that. The white community oppressed the black community, made them slaves because they felt that they were less than human. And so we see this narrative happening over and over again. And that's why we have to do everything we can to educate, inform, provide knowledge to our community to make sure our people stand tall and understand the right to vote is a powerful thing.
Right. Is that being voted on? Is that being?
It was already voted on, and unfortunately, of course, the Democrats stood strong in the state legislature. They stood strong here. They fought the fight. Many of us spoke at the hearings there at the State House 2 weeks ago, but the Republicans had the vote. And when we look at Republican power here, we could actually change it in the 15 counties in Iowa where we have a high percentage of Latino voters. So we have to work on education mobilization. Now, with that said, Amner, there is also legislation being crafted in Congress, in the U.S. Congress, to protect the right to vote. So that may, no pun intended, that may trump
right.
these state
The
bills
state, okay.
on that. So that is happening right now. It's called HR 1 in Congress. So we need to monitor that. We need to get the information out on how Congress will move forward on this. They clearly have the votes because we just saw the $1.9 trillion bill get passed just this last week. So now many of our community members will be receiving $1,400 checks. A lot of our adult members will be receiving those due to that vote. Now, with that vote, that means the right to vote through HR 1 will more than likely pass. So again, we will be able to hopefully get justice if that bill passes in Congress. There's a lot of different things there.
There's a lot of so going to the Congress and this possible bill or that the administration, the immigration bill that the Biden-Harris administration is presenting. Where is that at?
It is being crafted right now. It's being discussed. But the thing that we have to look at, though, is this bill doesn't seem to be covering all the 11 million people that we wanted to cover. So we need to look at it. We need to get more information on it. A number of groups, not only LULAC, but Voto Latino and another Hispanic Federation are groups that are discussing this. Now, at one point, this bill, this proposal has stated that it would apply to all 11 million. It would give 5 years of legal status for undocumented immigrants. 5 years of legal status to come out of the shadows, to be able to give up their whatever they were using to try to survive, allow them to get registered, allow them to get IDs, to get their social security numbers, to get their driver's licenses. Only 5 years. Under the prior administration, it was going to take 8 years, and it was only going to apply to about 3 million people. This would apply to 11 million people. So we're seeing that, but we need to find out what's under the hood. We need to make sure that, again, anyone who is undocumented, anyone who hasn't committed a major crime, and we would even question some of those things, because we feel that even though some of our members may have committed a felony, that they should not be held hostage by those type of crimes, because some crimes, even labeled as a felony, are really not significant at all. It has nothing to do with violent crime whatsoever. So we need to make sure that as many members of our community and other communities as possible have legal status if a bill passes. We feel confident that some form of this bill will pass, but we want to make sure that it applies to most, if not all, 11 million undocumented immigrants, giving them an opportunity to have legal status within the first 5 years, and then after the 5th year to become U.S. citizens. We need all of that to happen.
And a lot of people don't understand the impact. And I don't think they do, because if they did, you would be pro
Exactly.
immigration, because like the economy, if you want this country to be great and number one, like we were taught right in the 80s and 90s, number one, that's what this country has been kind of thriving on, right?
Right.
Like this, America's number one, and then you would want the economy to be robust, and immigration just makes
Exactly.
this
Right, and that you're bringing up a very important thing, Amner, because the white community needs to acknowledge that immigrants have made this economy, and that their form of exploiting immigrants through not allowing laws to happen has been a form of racism upon our community and other communities. It has been a Jim Crow act. It has been a form of slavery to not allow our people to become citizens, and that we were here way before white people came here. We were here. We were here with the indigenous population, and to say that we have not a right to be citizens of this country when we come here from Mexico or wherever is wrong,
right.
in so many ways. And again, it's a form of slavery. We should be allowing instant legal status when people come here.
Right.
Now, with that said, 70 million people come to this country every year on visas. 70 million. And we don't ever question that. We
Right.
don't ever question it. But yet we have a problem with these 11 million. Why?
Right.
We want to keep low wages. That apparently that's what
Exploitation.
The white business over. Yeah, right.
There's exploitation.
It's
right?
all about wages. It's all about slavery. It's about them receiving more from the hard work that we do.
I always like to kind of paint this example to people. Is that there's John and there's Juan. They're both carpenters, right? John is a U.S. citizen, and Juan isn't. He doesn't have any legal status. They both have the same years of experience, same training, same everything. And I'm the employer. And, John demands $25 an hour because that's what he's worth. So does Juan, And the employer looks at Juan and is like, well, this guy doesn't have paper, so I'm going to offer him 17,
Exactly.
16.
Exactly.
So then Juan is like, well, I got to take this job. I got to feed my family,
Right.
And Juan's mad because he's like, I know I'm worth 25, but the employer, mostly I see this a lot in construction, right? The employer is like, well, I'm going to pay this guy $16 an hour. And then John is mad at Juan because John thinks Juan took his job, but the culprit, the guilty party here is the employer that is exploiting the situation and not
Exactly.
being fair.
The employer is using the law that protects him, that allows slavery of the immigrant worker. And you're bringing up a very good example there, because most of the new construction, most of the new homes here in Des Moines are 90% of the labor
Yeah,
is Latino labor.
yeah.
It's-
That's no secret.
It's no secret,
Yeah.
and everybody knows it. And these big companies are making tons of money off exploiting labor, and they're not fighting for comprehensive immigration reform. They're not fighting for it, but yet they'll do charity work. They'll put a few of us on a shelf and say that they're doing some good deeds, but they're not doing the right thing. And we
Yeah.
need to expose that. We have been trying to bring out that information. We've done research. We've documented what not doing comprehensive immigration reform is, how it's hurting our economy to not do it, because raising wages, giving equal status to all workers, to all communities, raises the tax base, even though undocumented immigrants are still paying a fair amount of taxes. They're paying property taxes wherever they rent.
Payroll
on that,
taxes.
Payroll taxes. When more money is paid to workers, more money goes to local economies.
Yeah.
When all the money is held by the wealthiest people of this country, they don't put it back into the community. They invested in Wall Street. It goes overseas. So we need to be talking about equality. You're right on, Amner, and we need to make sure that our voices are heard.
You give Juan the status, now you level the playing field.
And you
Now
rebuild your
the
economy.
employer must pick the best qualified person and not what's more
Exactly.
convenient to them.
Exactly. And our community has always shown itself through the decades to not only are we the hardest workers, but we're the most qualified workers too. Our sense of community, our commitment, our way of giving back, we always do a better job. We need to be acknowledged for it.
Yeah, and we're talking billions of dollars that go into if an immigration bill is passed and millions of people get some kind of legal status. Actually, I would dare to say that a lot of people, they just employment authorization, just let me work legally and watch me thrive.
Right, and I'm glad you're bringing that up because when we did our white paper, no pun intended, when we did our white paper on Iowa 2 years ago, we calculated that $3.7 billion is provided by the immigrant community here in Iowa. $3.7 billion. It could be more than that if the immigrant community was put on equal footing.
Yeah, we buy houses, we buy cars, we create businesses.
We buy buildings.
Right.
We saved a lot of small rural towns when during the recession, where the Latino community went in, bought stores that had shut down, paid cash, helped refuel the economy. There's many rural communities in Iowa. If you don't see a Latino store or restaurant,
yes,
in a small rural community, you're missing out because most of them do on main streets.
Yeah, Perry's where I went to high school. It's a perfect example. It's a very diverse town now. Where, if it wasn't because of the immigrant community that came in and worked and settled there, I don't know where. There's some towns that are dying, right? There's some small towns that are.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you're bringing that up because there was a report that was done about 10 years ago that showed that in the Midwest states have negative growth when it comes to the white community, but positive growth when it comes to the immigrant community, the Latino community. So in 2010, it showed that the only reason that Iowa was able to creep back up from under 3 million to 3.1 million was due to the growth of the immigrant community and the Latino community. Had immigrants and Latinos not been coming to Iowa over the decades, we would be under 3 million. Iowa in the 1980s, 1990s, when you got here, was above 3 million. Around 2000, it dropped to 2.9 million. And then as we saw exponential growth within the immigrant community and the Latino community, of course, coming together in different ways, we saw an increase above 3 million again. And again, that was due to immigration, to Latinos. In Iowa, we had 60,000 of us in our community. We are now over 200,000 in our community. That's a big increase.
And that's just gonna keep growing.
It is because what we see, especially with economic advantages for the white community, usually with their children, they encourage them to exceed, to get their college educations, to get jobs in big cities, to move out of the Midwest. We've seen this in farming. In our communities, we are gaining wealth, through the generations, but we understand that sometimes the only jobs that we can achieve are in manufacturing, service sector, agriculture. So somebody has to do that work. The white community thinks that they no longer have to. They have higher levels of income. They're moving to another level. Our community, we're just still in many ways starting out. We're there, just like the Irish were before, the Germans were before. So we see that history, and we need that because we are the state that has different types of economy. We have agriculture, which is big, but we also have manufacturing.
Yeah.
Those jobs need people, and our community can provide that along with other immigrant communities.
There's the meatpacking plants, John Deere. The agricultural industry.
26,000 jobs are in meatpacking in 22 plants in Iowa. There are a number of pork meatpacking plants that provide almost are number 2 in the amount of pork provided worldwide. So it's a big process.
This state needs immigrants. Does
Always
right?
has.
Like it
Always
doesn't. It's not about it's a good like you should allow it or like there's a need for the labor area, like the labor.
We need it. Yes, we need it in agriculture. We need it in construction. We need it in road work. We need it in service sector. The white community will not be providing those resources. They will not. Their kids will not, in general, be working in those jobs. Somebody has to do that work.
What about messaging? So Obama got some slack a few months ago when he said that sometimes some statements can maybe turn off some folks. I don't know if you heard that. I'm paraphrasing, but I think one of them was I think abolishing the police.
Yes, I
So-
heard him say that.
So he cut some slack, right, about that, and he's saying, we gotta gain more allies. So the messaging is key. The language that we're using is key. The Republicans have a pretty good brand, right? Like they go fear factor. They go, they're invading our cities, criminals. They're stealing our jobs. America first,
Right,
border. So
right.
like they have branded that, and like that's working for them because. So, messaging wise, what do you think? Who do you think does a better job at messaging?
Well, the Republicans do a better job of it. They have the wordsmiths. They have poured a lot of money into marketing their ideas. But that's not to say that we can't do the same thing. We can definitely. When Obama made that statement, it was unfortunate that he didn't at the same time also talk about police brutality. He didn't do that. I think it was unfortunate that he brought it up that way. We can continue to say defund the police, and we can also talk about police brutality. We can also talk about the reduction of violent crimes that has continued to decrease over the decades, and not much information is happening on that. Amner, is that the level of violent crime has continued to decrease over the last several decades. The 1980s had the highest level other
Yes.
than in the 60s. And we have not acknowledged that. But there's a very simple way of doing it. And it's all about promoting the message, making sure it gets amplified, getting it into the newspapers, making sure that our activists, we should never discount the ability of a few people, few activists in any community to speak out, to make sure that they're connecting with the media, to put their message out. The BLM movement last year clearly showed that through protests and demonstrations and specific types of messaging, that they could get out there and amplify their message. Going back again to the March of Selma, why did Martin Luther King do what he did? He knew he needed to get in front of the newspapers. He needed his message amplified. He knew he needed to do it through protests. That was the only way that it would be covered in the newspapers and on the television station. That's the free media, when you can get that. That's why we need to protest. It's not only to show our anger, it's to get ourselves in the media, to have our issues discussed. So we need to do more of that. We need to get back out onto the streets. Another very sophisticated way is we need to start boycotting. We should be boycotting businesses that are not doing the right thing. When we look at the exploitation of meatpacking workers last year, we should be boycotting big meat.
Right.
We should be saying, don't buy these products at grocery stores. Protect meatpacking workers. If you want to buy meat, go to a meat locker. There's a number of them across the country. In Iowa, we did this when Cesar Chavez was fighting for the migrant workers. United Farm Workers Union. We did the great grape boycott. Was a very sophisticated way of getting things done by doing it, attacking economics of these corporations. We can be doing the same thing now, but again, it's about we need to educate, inform, provide this information to our activists so they can do these boycotts.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an arsenal of things: boycotts in the streets, protests,
Mm-hmm.
in the media. All those things can come together. All that exchange, the intersection, I think that's the terminology that's used now. We need to put those all together. They've always worked. And as somebody who's 64 years old, I can tell you that in my lifetime, I have seen how these boycotts have worked, how these marches have worked, how these sit-ins that Edna Griffin did have worked. We don't have to rely just on the legal system or waiting for the white community to give us justice, because they will not give us justice until we demand it.
And there's so many few activists, right? Like there's so many. I mean, I was about to bring up Cesar Chavez because he did a hunger strike, right? So he went on a hunger strike. Obviously, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and there's activists, among us and stuff. But do you think that there's that new Chavez, that new Edna that is eventually going to rise and become a leader? It's somewhere in the youth, right? It's somewhere.
Well, it's in the youth. It's in you. When I asked a thing on Facebook about local activists, I asked people if they knew who was a local activist in the Latino community. I found out just by others bringing up their names that we had like 150 activists just here in Des Moines from the Latino community, many of them young like you, but they're never acknowledged. They're never acknowledged. You and others here in this room and throughout this community, young people are already active, already participating in the BLM. Those in their 20s, late teens, whatever teens, we have many activists. We're just not acknowledging them. We need to acknowledge you and others in the community who are fighting the fight, who are discussing this. You are already the leaders, but the only problem we've had is we've had establishment leaders that have been acknowledged over and over again, and have been provided resources, and we need to change that direction. We need to make sure that local activists get information, get knowledge, get resources, get whatever mentoring they might need, and just continue to build, because I really do believe we're there. We're already there. Kind of what Obama said in 2008. We are the people we've been waiting for. We're here.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's my sense of it. We're already here.
And in a way, it's part of our problem. When I say our, I mean, I'm trying to get away from the word minority, and but people of color, African Americans, indigenous people, it's part of our problem asking for a seat at the table instead of just being like, we're building our own table.
We're asking to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
And we don't have to anymore. But I think, Amner, it is up to some of us, myself, Mary, and others who have been given the opportunity to connect, who've achieved certain things over struggle. It is important for us to make sure that we relay the information and the knowledge, and that we need to acknowledge our fellow community members.
Yeah.
We need to provide whatever resources possible. We need to do as much as possible.
Should we do our own list of 30 under 30 and 40 under 40?
We should.
I think we need to do that.
And you know what? I'm going to give you my list of 150 people. The 150 Latinos have already been acknowledged by each other.
Yes, do that.
Because we have Chelsea Chisholm, we have Marlua Barco, we have Veronica Gravera, we have you, we have, oh my God.
There's a young gal
Vanessa
running
Marcona.
for city council.
Yes.
She's African American.
She's African American. Indira. Her last name is coming to me. It'll come. We have Justin Lewis, who's also running. We need to name their names over and over again.
Yeah.
Over and over again. So Indira and Justin, Indira's running for Ward 1. Justin's running at large. Des Moines has 35% communities of color, so we have 70,000 people of color in a 200,000 member community. We could easily win these elections for both Justin and Indira. We can now win for Chelsea and Marlou, who ran for city council. We need to do that. We need to have people run for Polk County supervisors. We can run people for state legislature here in Polk County. We've had white Democrats who've been sitting pretty cozy at the state house because they sit there. They come from safe Democratic districts here in Des Moines, and we need to run against them during primaries.
Right.
Because if we win the primary, we win the general.
And that's one thing that I wanted to bring up before we end this amazing conversation. Not just LULAC, right, but Latinos, the perception is that Latinos vote Democrat only, and or African Americans are, Democrat. Like, we're not monolithic.
Right.
Communities.
We're not. And, Rob Barron, another Latino leader here in Des Moines who's on the school board, said it pretty accurately yesterday. He said, we don't really need to spend much more time thinking about whether or not we should be Democrats. We can always run as a different political group,
right,
for state house, for local elections in general. Rob was right on, and both Rob said that, Chelsea Chisholm Vargas said that yesterday. We don't have to rely upon the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party wants to rely on us because they pretty much have lost every election here in Iowa over the last two election cycles. So we don't really need them, although it would be good to stay with them because it could gain us more capacity.
Right.
But we need to look at forming, at least within our own groups, political groups.
Right.
So, we have LULAC, there's Forward Latino, we've had the Latino Forum, we have a number of Latino groups. Don Orapito has El Éxito with young people. So there's many different groups that we can form in, and we can get political engagement going.
Right.
Yeah.
And as there's power in numbers, right? We come together, and
in unity there is strength.
Yeah. I saw an interview that you did with Iowa Public Television, and Rob Barron was there with you.
Yeah, we were both on.
And stuck with me that you said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
That's right. Yeah.
And that stuck with me because there's a reason behind this project, this amplified platform that we're creating, that Kenji and I are creating. Part of that is to create this network of like-minded people that we don't necessarily lean Democrat or Republican. It's just we want progress, and we want good things to happen to people. And there's no, but the more together we come, the stronger we're gonna be.
You're bringing up a really good point there, and you do need to do it. And I applaud you for looking at doing that, because what we need to do with a group like that is we need to identify who's already registered to vote. And of course, in Des Moines, we have about 10,000 registered Latino voters. We need to look at the voter rolls, and we need to figure out who isn't registered yet. We need to put pressure on Des Moines Public Schools to do the right thing, to make sure that we can go into the schools and register our people to vote, because every month 1,500 young people hit age 18 in Des Moines schools.
Really?
Yes, and many of those are from our community.
Yeah.
So we have Pablo Ortega, who works for Des Moines schools. We need to, for lack of a better way of saying it, put the pressure on him to get into those government classrooms to register our young people.
Yeah.
And along with the superintendent, Ahart. And we also need to be hanging out at grocery stores, because that's where people shop every day. Register our people to vote. Count our people, just like Martin Luther King did. Make sure they vote. Vote for our candidates. Get them in. That's how we get political power.
Right.
Fight for economic justice. Because at the end of the day, this is not a moral issue. This is an economic issue. We need to fight for equality. Our people are starving. Our backs are against the wall. Not many people in our community could ever feel economically safe. We always have to worry about paying bills because we're never making enough money as much as a white community. So we need to fight for those things and get people elected.
Right. And a lot of the changes to infiltrate the system, get elected to school boards, city council, county board, obviously Senate seats. And so anybody that could be hearing this is, get involved.
Right. Exactly. And it's not hard. It's not hard, but they need to engage. They need to engage with groups that you form, that others form. We need to help our young people understand how the process works. We need to acknowledge them. If they want to be acknowledged, we need to acknowledge them. Help them with those tools. And of course, going back to Rob Barron could easily run for any state house position. We've had Nathan Blake, who is an assistant attorney general, who's a Latino who's ran for the state legislature. We need to get you to run for city council. And we need to support Indira and Justin, who are running for city council now.
Yeah, hopefully I'm going to have Justin and Indira sometime, hopefully in the near future. I'll send an invitation to them. Okay. But I want to thank you for making time. I really appreciate it. If you don't mind, I'll send you another invite in the future to do it again and bring us up to date on the issues at hand. And I've been following you for a couple of years now, and I always appreciate your knowledge on the Latino community and how we can impact, how we are impacting in a positive way, and not let the narratives take over. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Amner. Thank you very much. Thank you for your leadership.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
All right. There you have it. Joe Henry.
I like my cameo.
Yeah. You're walking around like a dumbass.
Yeah, it kind of pissed me off, to be honest.
Yeah.
It pissed me off that I forgot that the cameras were there.
What did you do when you saw yourself?
Yeah, I just wanted to punch myself right in the mouth.
It's like a quality production.
What an idiot. Yeah.
And it's not like you can take anything off because it's part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Like it's what I said.
Well, I thought about it, but I was like,
that's the thing about video is that sound, we can edit a lot of stuff, we can take out a lot of stuff that we don't like, or
video there's like you're screwed.
That's fun.
Yeah,
it's gonna be fun. So thank you again to Joe Henry. Thank you to Good Vibes Movement. Everybody go to amplifydsm.com and take a look at the new podcasters. And yeah, share everything. Share as much as you can.
Share your money. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we're not asking for money.
Yeah. Not yet.
Should we? Not yet. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to the Amner Martinez podcast, and we'll be talking to you soon.